And hence why I'm trying with my notice of motion to try and pick up some of those people who might be experiencing problems. But by and large, I would hope that we do have a community, and I would hope that we don't have some of the very significant problems that may exist elsewhere. But we were having problems with dumping of hazardous material. That was a growing problem. And excuse me, ma'am. Thank you. Officer, would you like to provide anything additional to that?
Through you, Madam, I think you've covered most of the points.
So thank you, sir. Would you like to come to the microphone?
Joyce Archibald again, Carnegie Hall at Bassendean. I'm just curious. It wouldn't surprise me in the slightest if people decide to get into the skip bin to see what's in there. Who's going to be liable to any injury that people may suffer as a result of trying to access the skip bin and the contents thereof?
Through you, Madam Mayor. It would depend on the circumstances, obviously, of the individual incident, but the town does have various protections in place through LGIS, the insurer or the body that provides protection to local governments, such as public liability insurance and so on, as with the contractor. So it would depend on the specific circumstances of the matter.
So it sounds as though it's possible that the town of Bassendean would provide insurance for someone who was injured as a result of going in the skip bin because they could no longer access the goods along the side of the road.
I think that's taking my answer a few steps further than what I've said. But
I mean, I hope it doesn't happen, but it's a sort of risk. I mean, you've talked about many other risks associated with leaving the stuff beside the side of the road. This, to me, is a risk of having skip bins. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from the audience? Okay, with that, I will close public question time. I did receive 2 questions from Mr. Yates. However, the staff will provide a written response to Mr. Yates. So I don't believe we've got any petitions. No? Okay. So with that, councillors, we will move on to 9.1, which is confirmation of minutes. The officer recommendation that the minutes of the special council meeting held on the 25th of October 2022 be received and confirmed as a true record. Do I have a mover? Councillor Carter, seconded Councillor Wilding. Anyone against? I'll declare that carried. 9.2, officer recommendation that the minutes of the ordinary council meeting held on the 25th of October 2022 be received and confirmed as a true record. A mover? Councillor Ames, seconded. Councillor McWilliam. Anyone against? I'll declare that carried. We have no business deferred from previous meeting. External committee reports. So 11.1, the officer recommendation that councillor notes the documents from external committees have been received within the reporting period. I have a mover, Councillor Wilding, seconded. Councillor Carter. Anyone against? I'll declare that carried. So with that, councillors, someone will go and turn off the alarm. We will move on to the items on block. So councillors, coming out of on block, I have 12.2, 12.6 and 12.7. So the items remaining in on block are 12.3, 12.9, 12.10. Oh, sorry, Councillor Carter.
Can I
bring 12.11 now?
Can I bring 12.11 now? Thank
Sorry.
you. And yes, no, that'll be fine. 12.11.
Councillors, are there any others to come out on block? I say, so we have 12.3, 12.9, 12.10, 12.12 and 12.13 remaining on block. Can I have a mover? For that, that's councillor McWilliam, seconded councillor Wilding. Anyone against? I'll declare that carried. So we'll move to the first item, which is 12.2. And if I could ask Shaw to provide any additional information on that. I know you gave a comprehensive summary last week.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. There's been no further changes to the report for this item, but I'm happy to provide some additional commentary on other items if required.
Councillors, do we have questions on this item? Councillor Carter?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through you to the Planning Director, the item 12.2 is a not, what do they call it? It's a not compliant. Yes, thank you very much. I've got it written down. And I believe that there might be an alternative thing. It's not a motion, it's a recommendation.
Yeah.
For us to consider on this particular item.
I think I was just opening it up to councillors for questions to see if there are any additional questions. Councillors will be aware that I sent an email this afternoon requesting some additional information from Ms. Shaw. In particular, I was interested in some of the, sorry, I'll just get to the question in a minute, Shaw. On page 15 of the agenda, the objectives of the residential zone as defined in the local planning scheme 10 are A, to maintain lifelong and lifetime long-term residence as an integral component of the Bassendean community. B, to continue and increase the attraction for young families to reside and raise their families in the Bassendean community. And E also says to limit non-residential activities to those of which the predominant function is to service the local residential neighbourhood and for self-employment or creative activities, provided such activities have no detrimental effect on the residential amenity. So the question I asked this afternoon was, given that these clauses exist in local planning scheme 10, and they seem very structured towards keeping residential zones exclusively for residential, would you concede that short stay accommodation is more a business than a commercial activity?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. When the town's required to receive these applications, where it's an application for a use not listed, before we determine whether or not we accept the application, we need to consider whether it may comply with the objectives of the zone. And on that basis, we can accept the application. And in doing so, we then go through the assessment process, including public consultation, and consider any submissions that have been received on the matter. So it's open for council to consider, following receipt and through the assessment of the application, that it does not comply with the objectives of the zone. However, that would potentially be precluding council from considering any future application on the basis that this short stay accommodation did not comply with the objectives of the zone, and therefore any future application for short stay accommodation would also arguably not comply with the objectives of the zone. So because the wording of the objectives does not preclude commercial uses within the residential zone, it says may, council needs to consider whether or not it complies with the objectives of the local planning policy and can consider the application, or whether or not it should be refused.
Follow-up question, if I may. We recently approved a policy for short stay accommodation, which was to limit the existence of these facilities within 400 metres of the town centre basically to ensure that it was more central and providing benefit to the central business district. So this one is outside the 400 square metres. So would there be, given that policy that we have passed previously, would there be disadvantage in sticking to the policy and ensuring that short stays stay within the 400 metre zone?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So compliance with local planning policies is a relevant planning consideration under clause 67 of our planning regulations. So it is open to council to refuse the application on the grounds of not complying with any aspect of a local planning policy.
Councillor Plivka?
A question through you, Madam Mayor, to the Director of Planning. So you mentioned those clause 67 factors. It's open for council to give as much or as little weight to each of those as it deems fit. On that basis, is it open for council to legitimately refuse this application?
Through you, Madam Mayor, yes it is.
Thank you. There's more questions, but unless somebody's wanting to move the officer's recommendation, I have an alternate, which is to refuse. But I'll first give the floor if anyone wants to
Would you
move the
like to
officers.
read that out first?
Yes, certainly. So everyone can have an idea about that. So that council refuses the application for development approval of an existing use not listed, short stay accommodation being the use, at units 1 through 8 of 63 3rd Avenue, Bassendean, for the reasons that follow. The first one being the proposal does not comply with the location criteria contained in the local planning policy, short stay accommodation, and a variation is not supported as the proposed use may result in an accumulation of adverse impacts at a scale that may detrimentally affect the amenity of the local area in a manner that would not reasonably be expected in an existing low-density residential context. So that's the first one. Second one, shorter, the application is inconsistent with the requirements of orderly and proper planning. So that is the alternate. Unless somebody wants to move the officer's recommendation, I'm happy to move that one.
So first of all, I'll ask, are there any more questions from councillors? Okay, do we have a seconder? Live answer. Councillor Carter, do we have anyone against Councillor Plivka's? Okay, I'll declare that carried, Councillor Plivka.
Offer together.
Councillor Plivka, at the end of the meeting, could you provide some reasons for the
So
to
certainly.
the minute clerk? Thank you. Okay, councillors, we'll move on to 12.4, which is the evaluation of pedestrian zone trial. Now, councillors, you will be aware that I have put up a recommendation. But before I get to that, I'd ask, are there any other comments from the officer to be made on this topic?
Through Madam Mayor, no, there was various questions, statements and a couple of deputations last week, so I think that has been covered in some detail. I believe there has been some wording provided between myself, Madam Mayor and Councillor Plivka. Staff are generally comfortable with that wording.
So for members in the gallery, I'll read out the wording that I have created for this item. That Council 1 notes the outcomes of the public consultation on the temporary Old Perth Road pedestrian-only zone activation. 2, requests the CEO to expedite the removal of the infrastructure from within the pedestrian-only zone and the reopening of the road to vehicular traffic. 3, notes that the future precinct structure plan will include an analysis of movement, transport and car parking matters, which will assist in the consideration of potential future pedestrian-only zones in and around Old Perth Road. So, councillors, I'm moving that. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Plivka? Oh, you want questions?
Oh.
Sorry, I will slow that down. Questions, Councillor A, do you have a question?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through to yourself in regards to your notice of motion. And this time, yes, there would be a slight amendment to this. very briefly, just want to see if we can put a timeline on that point number 2 there. So request the CEO to expedite the removal of the infrastructure from within the pedestrian zone and the reopening of the road to vehicular traffic timeline.
So I've used the word expedite, which is to do this in a hurry.
I understand that, and we're aware that that means different meanings to different individuals. I'm not saying that we're not going to be dragging our feet for this, but I would like to maybe see a timeline that might be associated with that.
Could I just ask CEO an opinion on this?
Sure.
With respect to timelines?
Through Madam Mayor, typically it wouldn't be lawful for council to impose a timeframe on the CEO. However, understanding the feeling regarding this initiative and the desire to have it concluded quickly, staff very much aware that we need to mobilise quickly. And if indeed council resolves to cease the trial this evening, we have already prepared our door crew to action that immediately.
Can I ask a second question? A follow-on question with that. I know that last week I asked about the pallet furniture and you've indicated that it had to be disposed of or stored. Have the administration had any thoughts about what they're doing with the furniture?
Through Madam Mayor, in the first instance, it would likely be stored, probably at the depot, to enable the road to be opened up. But staff have had discussion with other local governments which should be undertaking similar pedestrian zone trials. There's a bit of interest from those other local governments to use the pop-up furniture that we procured through our trial. There's also been discussions with the Department of Communities who may also have a use for those pop-up aspects. So nothing's been particularly confirmed because obviously council has not yet made the decision, but discussions have certainly occurred.
Okay. Sorry, Councillor Clifford, you've got a question.
Just to give business an indicative time frame for the removal of this infrastructure, are we talking days, weeks, months? Sort of what's the order of time?
Thank you, Councillor. Through you, Madam Mayor, we expect to have the furniture removed by Friday, close of business.
Yeah, thank you.
So, Councillor Ames, you've heard the responses, so I would assume that the notice of motion, the recommendation as it exists, more than adequately covers the.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes.
So we have Councillor, I moved it, Councillor Lithgow has seconded. And no other questions from councillors at the moment? So do we have anyone opposed? I'll declare that carried. So we now move on to 12.5, which is Parking Amendment Local Law 2023. Again, I would ask the officer if there is any added commentary you would like to add to this one.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a change on page 46 of the agenda to do with the consultation that's required. We'd previously advised that we would be publishing a notice in the West Australian newspaper. We've since confirmed that we only need to provide assistance through My Aged Care for the users. So in terms of potentially utilising the services provided by the City of Swan, we've had very preliminary discussions with them, simply in the form of them being a provider similar to Amana or St John's, etc. They're another operator that operates through My Aged Care that can provide community transport. They were open to those discussions based on the resolution that the City of Swan made. However, we needed to wait and see what the decision of council was tonight as to whether or not we continue to engage with them. In the first instance, we've been liaising with the current private providers like Armana, simply because we'd already been in discussions with them through the seniors services in the past, so we already had those contacts available.
Councillor Carter?
Oh, thank you very much. My question is to you, Ms Shaw. Given that there are private providers, do they also provide the same sorts of service that we provide for our seniors, like shopping trips and the like? Or is it just to medical appointments and to other group activities?
Through you, Madam Mayor, they do provide the same services. They do provide shopping services and the like. I think the key difference, and I think as we've heard from some of the residents tonight, you can't replace the community connections that you've had with people for 40 years. You know, so even though the providers of these services offer the same type of service, it's about between either the existing volunteers and the clients, but just in general for overall welfare checks for seniors who may otherwise be isolated as a result of losing this service.
One more question, if I may. I understand that a lot of these providers require at least 24, maybe two or 3 days notice. Is that a problem for transitioning to these services?
Through you, Madam Mayor. So with the discussions that we've had with the providers already, we've had a look to see how many of our existing users had appointments that they needed to get to in the coming months. They've provided assurances to us that they would have seats available to ensure that they can get to those appointments. In terms of the notification period, it depends if you're registered for that service. So they do provide priority to those users who are registered and are regular users of those services, not too dissimilar to the current service provided by our volunteer services.
And with your indulgent one, very last question. This happened very, very quickly, and a lot of the worry is that it's so quick, it's so sudden. There was a very good suggestion made by Mrs. Seidel tonight about deferring it until we've actually, the risk assessment is in line with the new Act on health and safety and welfare. So is it possible, can we defer this until we have greater clarity on how this new Act is going to impact not only the transport services, but volunteer services throughout the town, including things like land care and so on?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So just in terms of the comment about transitional arrangements, of the 44 remaining users, we have had contact with them and are liaising with them in terms of their preferences for alternative transport. We've received a range of responses ranging from assistance to sign up to My Aged Care, to users that already had My Aged Care but were choosing to use our service, and just ensuring that they will be able to make the appointments that they already had booked in for. In terms of deferring the service, whilst it's open to council to consider reinstating the service subject to risk mitigation measures being implemented, which, as you can see in the report, requires relevant financial considerations, and there is significant funding that's required to continue the service, there's no option for council to continue the service as is. Now that we're aware of the risk associated with it, we're required to comply with the legislation. And even if council resolves to continue the service at a later date, it must cease operating in the immediate future.
That is a directive we had given
Yes.
to us, is it?
It's not a directive that's been given to us from the state government. It's a requirement to comply with the legislation. Thanks.
Councillor A.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you. And the question again goes to the Director of Planning, Ms. Shaw. By the looks of things, the transport service is currently still operating. obviously the capacity not to be able to grow or to bring new clients in, but it's obviously to minimise. So it's running in some sort of capacity down to the 23rd of December. Your comment there regarding a time.
Made, and it doesn't matter what decision we make. So why are we being asked to?
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I'm confused. Forgive me.
Thank you, Madam. Just to clarify that point, and I note that it was raised by the community earlier, the messaging that the volunteer services has been providing is that the service will definitely be ceasing in the near future, that council can decide tonight whether or not it wants to fund the mitigation measures to reintroduce the service in the future. So whilst the staff has been advising that yes, it will be ceasing soon, no decision has been made as to whether or not the service will be reinstated in future.
I see. Oh, well, I'll let others ask.
Councillor William.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Having been a bit of a sort of legislation tragic for some time, I had a look at the explanatory memorandum and I found that quite interesting in terms of the discussion around volunteering, because having been involved in writing legislation, you have to take account of what the impact is likely to be. Some of the things that have been raised by the community tonight were the ones that I found too. So my question is to the Director of Planning. Did staff have a look at the explanatory memorandum for the legislation, and also the guide for work health and safety for volunteer organisations pertaining to the introduction of the WHS laws?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor. Yes, we did. The town has a designated work health and safety officer that is fully across all of the legislation and associated guidelines. And unfortunately, well, realistically, we are the PCBU. So this legislation does apply to us, regardless of whether or not the operators of the service are volunteers. The legislation is applicable.
Um, and the officer would have also seen the references to volunteer organisations being able to provide such a service and the requirements placed on volunteers to operate in a safe manner in their duties. So it sort of is, I thought, and I wonder if you agree, whether it was a move to try and allay some of the concerns that were coming out.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor. That's not to say that the volunteers can't continue to be part of the service in future should council choose to fund the risk mitigation measures. This item is more about introducing those risk mitigation measures, including providing additional training for the volunteers to ensure that we mitigate the risk and comply with the legislation. So should council provide the service in future, there would certainly be a place for volunteers to continue to participate in the service.
Yeah. Hear what the Councillor Williams was saying about the unintended consequences, and perhaps volunteers should be afforded the same sort of protection as Good Samaritan legislation affords to people helping others in need, so they're not held to the same standard. But I think we've discussed that act. I want to talk about the Equal Opportunity Act and the hoist. So this hoist that will enable us to transport people that are confined to a wheelchair, that comes at a one-off cost of $10,000, is that correct?
That's correct, thank you.
And can that hoist be deployed to do other things? So say you have a relatively large person that becomes temporarily immobilised, perhaps in an emergency scenario, would that hoist be able to assist in lifting people that couldn't otherwise be lifted?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I don't have the technical specifications of the hoist available, but I would assume yes.
Yeah, okay. And so in terms of that, do we currently have the apparatus that could fulfil that function in the context of an emergency within the town?
Through you, Madam Mayor, not to my knowledge, no.
Okay, so we could potentially, by addressing the Equal Opportunity Act, also, I suppose, upskill our fleet and our personnel and have that, I suppose, additional string to our bow where we could then use that in an emergency situation?
Yes, yes.
Sounds like money well spent.
Okay. I have a question in respect to the first point in the officer recommendations to discontinue the community transport service by the 23rd of December 2022. Going back to Councillor Carter and Councillor Ames' questions earlier in the piece about deferring, would it be possible to defer it to the December meeting, which is December 13, not so much to interfere with the discontinuing date, but more to councillors to have a better idea of the direction that they might want to take with this service? Because I've heard questions around the room about different aspects of the service, and to me, it seems that we haven't yet settled on what we might want from this service. So
continue the service should council choose to do that. Alternatively, as provided in the officer's recommendation, there are other providers that can provide this service.
So, just to follow on, sorry, councillors, just to follow on that, Councillor Wilding requested some additional information which was provided late this afternoon. I'm not sure about the rest of you. I actually have not had a chance to read that document at all. So my preference would be to be able to read that document and base my decision on information that has been provided recently. So, councillors, I'll open it up to other questions if there are other questions first. Councillor Wilding.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through you to the Director of Planning, the costs for continuing the service are quite high given the current number of clients. If we were to invest in the service and boost the number of clients, would that then make it a better cost-benefit analysis for the service? Could we turn it into something that we actually promote and actively sort of invest in as a town? And would that make it a more attractive proposition for council?
Thank you, through you, Madam Mayor. So prior to the reduction in numbers as a result of interferences due to COVID and the result of this assessment being undertaken, the service was traditionally operating at around 95 clients at any given time. I haven't done the numbers there to work that out, but the cost per trip would obviously be higher than 64 that it currently is there. Whether or not council can decide on a figure that it thinks would be appropriate to continue to provide such a service would be up to council as part of its budget deliberations.
Another question. The wording of the officer recommendation, noting that the service will cease on the 23rd, regardless of council's decision, judging by the commentary so far, and noting Mayor Hamilton's comments that the council currently doesn't seem to have a consensus regarding what the future would be, could the wording of point 1 be rephrased to suspend the community transport service and such wording until another time? I'm not entirely sure how it would read. Rather than discontinue, if the council's not sure about the future decision, can it just be a suspension until future decision is made on the actual future of the service?
Through Madam Mayor, there's no objection to that, and if council was minded to amend the officer recommendation, I would probably also suggest, based on some of the questions and discussions taking place tonight, is that rather than council discontinue the service, is that council notes the suspension of the service, because as we discussed, or as I made clear last week, the suspension or discontinuance of the service is not a decision for council per se. It's a decision for the CEO as a PCBU and as the individual liable for any industrial manslaughter. So, noting that it's not a council decision in the classic sense, council would simply note the suspension of the service and could thereafter consider its re-enlivenment or reactivation at some future time if council wants to fund the mitigation measures.
So, before we go, Councillor, I'll ask one more time, are there other questions? Otherwise, I have two different ways forward on this. So, no other questions, councillors? So, Councillor Wilding, I understand what you're suggesting about point 1, but that still leaves point 2. I would like to move a deferral motion on this to the December meeting, if only to read the risk assessment that was sent through, risk analysis that was sent through this afternoon. So, Councillor Rivka?
In light of what the CEO has said, could we split that? And if all we're doing is noting that there will be the suspension, so we're being told by the CEO that this service will be suspended regardless of what we do in this room. So just to note that so that we can communicate to the community that that service will be suspended at that point in time, but then to defer off the other component so that we can then decide what this service, when it re-emerges, will look like. Well, that's what I understand the CEO to be saying, is that that's simply something we've been told, so we just have to note that there will be that suspension, whether we like it or not. and then we can deal with the rest separately. And are we able to do that?
So my question on that would be, this report is in the public realm now, and the discussion in the room at both the briefing and this council meeting clearly indicates that point one, the service will cease on the 23rd of December. The CEO's requirements, we're all aware of that. So I'm not sure whether it makes any difference deferring the item to the December meeting, because I'm not sure that you can actually do what Councillor Flicker has.
Through Madam Mayor, Council can certainly resolve as suggested by Councillor Flicker, in that if it notes the suspension of the service as of the 23rd of December, it would be suspended until such time as there is another decision. And that other decision would be to fund the mitigation measures through either the mid-year review if that was possible, or the annual budget as a default position. If Council made no other decision to fund the mitigation measures, the decision is tantamount to maintaining the suspension. But it is also open to Council to, at any point in the future, fund the mitigation measures and realise that program.
So, Councillor Haynes.
Very brief, and just for my knowledge, and thanks for this. And it could be through the CEO or to the direct planning. When would normally when would in the new year normally this service be reactivated after the Christmas period? Under normal circumstances. How long of the festive season does it stop?
Thank you, through you, Madam Mayor. So we typically return on the 9th of January, and our volunteer services return at that time. And it also depends on any appointments that may have been booked by the clients and the availability of the volunteer drivers.
Thank you.
Councillor Wilding.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Noting that if Council was to note the suspension at this meeting, what trigger would there be for it then to come back and have a council decision in the future? Would that be part of the budget review process? Would that become a separate item? What can councillors expect in terms of the next opportunity to look at the future of the service? Should it just resolve to note the suspension?
Through Madam Mayor, if nothing else, it would be part of the annual budget discussions. But if Council wanted to raise it before that at the mid-year review, there would be an opportunity there. Alternatively, Council could effectively, if it was to not resolve as recommended in Part 2, simply note that it intends to reconsider the matter at point X. If Council wants to consider it at a particular time in the future, we could effectively sort of embed that into the resolution this evening.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, for your indulgence. Is there any scope for the town to do any sort of mapping of residents' aspirations for the service in terms of should Council consider it again at a set time to better understand the community's expectations, what they'd like to find out of the service, to find out if the proposal, what the potential funding proposal would match their aspirations, or if we would be potentially funding a service that would continue to dwindle. But given the opportunity to provide that feedback, would there be analysis for Council?
Through Madam Mayor, if Council's of the view that the town should undertake some community consultation on the matter, that is certainly a possibility. I think it would be reasonable to assume those 44 individuals who currently use the service at least would support the retention. And what we might find out through a community consultation process is what the balance of the community considers about. And if that was the missing piece of information the Council requires to make an informed decision on the matter, that is something we can embark upon. But as Ms. Shaw says, in terms of a technical assessment of the risk of associated mitigation measures, the town has provided the information that we have. There's nothing more we can provide, save for any input from the community.
Oh, sorry.
One last question. Does that, if Council wishes for that consultation to happen, does that need to be written into the recommendation tonight for the resolution? Sorry, into the resolution.
Through Madam Mayor, I think in terms of a decision-making trail, that would be preferred. If that was Council's desire to, prior to making any full and final decision on the program that it wishes to have the input from the community, that would be appropriate to embed into a decision.
So if I have an additional, question there. Given that the service is going to be suspended, discontinued, whatever word you'd like to use, it's clear that moves to close down that service on the 23rd of December will happen, correct?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, existing users of the service, we're already in consultation with them. Yeah.
Okay. So the administration are already moving to ensure that the service ceases on the 23rd of December. So I would still like to move to defer to the December meeting. Because there are so many questions that have come around this table this evening, and I'm not entirely sure that writing an alternative in short notice is actually going to work very well for us today. So, yes, Councillor Wiley.
Apologies, Madam Mayor. I can ask a quick question regarding the impact of the deferral motion, to be honest.
Yes, please.
Is there any material impact in terms of liability if the decision is made or noted tonight or on the 13th of December?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. No, because we are already in consultation with the existing users of the service. The intent was merely to provide certainty to those users as to the future of the service as soon as possible.
So there's no additional liability that the town holds. They haven't resolved to close the service at this time. Should something happen between now and the 13th of December?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. As previously advised, the risk is already there, but we will be not opening the service up to additional users to try and mitigate any additional risk, but it's certainly still risky to operate.
Councillor Clifford.
So just in terms of the timeline, when's the earliest that we can say we want to reintroduce this service as it has always been with the upgrades to be compliant with the changes to legislation? What's the soonest that we can get the money in order to do that? What month can we get that?
Through you, Madam Mayor. There is a mid-year budget review process that we brought to council on the council meeting on the 28th of February 2023. So council was minded to allocate a budget that could theoretically be done there, but the mid-year review isn't the spot for typically new projects, so there would need to be savings found elsewhere to compensate the budget for that mid-year review process. But that would be the next available opportunity. That may also be impacted on depending on what council is seeking in terms of community consultation at the time.
So potentially by March we could be in a position to be paying for these upgrades.
Yes.
Okay.
Obviously then they would need to be implemented, which is another question probably for Ms. Shaw, but from a budget perspective, the budget could be allocated at the end of February if there were sufficient funds available.
We'll move on to Ms. Shaw. What is the lead time? What can we do in advance of getting our hands on that money so that we've done planning and scoping out all of the different requirements? How long would that take? So when would we need to commence that process if we were to get our hands on that money in March?
Thank you, through you, Madam Mayor. We have already scoped out what the mitigation measures are, which is the largest component of that undertaking. So it would simply be a case of once funds are available to actually engage with those suppliers. The item that would likely take the greatest length of time would be recruitment of a dedicated officer with the certification to undertake that aged care assistance. Recruitment process could typically be 4 to 5 weeks, but it depends on who would be available at that point in time. In terms of the training for the existing volunteers, we could organise that quite quickly, but again, it would depend on the availability of the volunteers and what suits them.
Okay, so all that time frame people could potentially expect, and there may be delays, but the soonest that they could expect to see this service as it currently is reintroduced with the upgrades would be May, June?
I would say, yeah, probably June, I would say. Thank you.
Okay, great, thank you.
councillors. Certainly asked enough questions on this one, I think. I would like to move to defer this to the December meeting. And I would ask for a seconder. Councillor McWilliam. Do I have anyone against? Declare that carried. Okay. Councillors, the next item is 12.7. I'm not sure that Mr. Gibson, you wanted to add anything to this. I only put this out to ask about the resolution.
No, Madam Mayor, happy to take the question on the resolution.
Just trying to bring it up. So, councillors, do you have any questions about that item while I try to bring up my computer that's closed down?
Do we get any wheelchairs in here as well?
I'll be right. No, I'll be right. Just take the
Mitigate.
Okay. So on page 159, resolutions of council. So this is finalisation of the 4A scheme. And I just wanted to ask a question with the first part of that. The Department of Planning, Lands and Heritage that purchases the 10 properties previously acquired by the town, which are, did we get a negative response to that or no response?
Through Madam Mayor, as it says in the column on the right, the DPH advisor will not purchase the sites from the town.
Sorry, I didn't see that. Apologies for that. And the other one was page 163. Now that was the cat. Sorry, you're correct, that has been done as well. Okay, I have no further questions. Councillors, any questions on this? Otherwise, I'll ask for a mover. Councillor Wilding, seconded. Councillor McWilliam, anyone against? Declare that carried. So, next one is 12.8, resolutions of council. So, I don't think there's any officer comment on this one. Councillors, you will note that I provided to Mr. Gibson a amendment, so it's moving the officer's recommendation with the amendments. But before I do that, are there any questions on this? Okay, so for the benefit of the recording, the officer's recommendation is as is, except for dot point 3 where there's a slight change. Notes that information of previous pre-May 2022 resolutions of council that have been completed since the last update will be provided to councillors each quarter. The original resolution had periodically by the council board, by the CEO bulletin. Point 4, request that the CEO provide a new public register of council resolutions dated from May 2022 on the website that provides details on the meeting type, meeting date, item number, item type, officer recommendation, council decision if different from the officer recommendation. 2, update the register each month following the release of council meeting minutes. And 3, at the conclusion of each calendar year, provide a standalone document of the resolutions of that year and publish that document on the town's website. And 5, that no resolution of council will be deleted from this online register, and when all actions outlined in the resolution of council have been completed, the simple dated completed notation be entered into the last column against the relevant resolution of council. So councillors, if there's any questions, Councillor Wilding.
just to the staff, they have any commentary on points 4 and 5.
Through you, Madam Mayor, broadly there's no objection. I responded to Madam Mayor's draft wording this morning with a slightly reworked version that broadly the same marks, but some slight changes. One of those changes was to remove reference to the component number 5, where it's requesting that no resolution be deleted because there would be no cause for that to occur in any event, and staff probably felt it unnecessary. There's no harm in having it there, but there would be no reason to actually delete it at all. And similarly, the table provided in the document has in its rightmost extent a column saying complete, so it was quite implicit that we would actually fill that out once it was complete. So staff felt that part 5 was unnecessary, but equally it's not particularly problematic, so there's no objection.
Do you want to explain the change from February to May?
Through you, Madam Mayor, yes, Madam Mayor used February 2023, presumably being the first council meeting next calendar year. I offered by taking it back to May 2022. As discussed last week, we transferred one of our corporate systems to a new software package where agendas from May 2022 perspective are now being done to that more contemporary system, so we can reliably actually provide that information from May 22 onwards rather than waiting till next calendar year.
Any other questions, councillors? So I would like to move the officer's recommendation with those amendments. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Wilding. Do I have anyone against? Declare that carried. So we now move on to item 12.11, alternative weed control strategies, children's playgrounds. So Councillor Carter, you had this brought out en bloc. So I'm not sure whether the officer would like to make a discussion on this or just go straight to questions.
Straight to questions, Madam Mayor. Yep.
Okay, this has been brought back, as you know, from the August meeting when it was the alternate motion was to bring a report. So that has been done, and I thank Ms Davey and her team for such a thorough report on this. But the original, certainly has gone through many iterations over the past year, report is that we cease spraying on or near children's playgrounds still stands. So my motion needs to be debated because it was brought back tonight to be debated from the August meeting.
I'm going to seek advice from the CEO. Sorry, Councillor Carter, I have to seek advice on that.
Through Madam Mayor, the decision from August this year was that the CEO requested a duration of a report in 3 months, which brings us to this evening, outlining the alternative weed control strategy so as to reduce or where possible eliminate the use of glyphosate or other herbicides in children's playgrounds. So that was obviously presented to Council in September this year, where Council resolved to defer it, provide more time to consider the matter, brings us to this evening. So in terms of the requirement of Council, the request of Council to have a report prepared, that has been satisfied by virtue of this report. If Council wishes to debate the matter and amend the staff recommendation, which is simply to note the contents of the report as a means of satisfying the August resolution of Council, it is open to Council to substitute the officer recommendation with something else. But the August resolution was simply requesting a subsequent body of work, which is this report in front of Council this evening.
Yes, may I ask a another question. The the report was to defer it to get a report. It wasn't not to debate this particular motion. And I think we've now come to this point that we really should.
So Councillor Carter, what the CEO, please correct me if I'm wrong, is open to yourself or any councillor to change the officer's recommendation.
Yes.
And for that, you would need a seconder, and if there's anyone against you, enter into debate. And it's open to any councillor to actually move the officer's recommendation as is as well. And again, if you're against that, you can debate that. So there can be debate in either scenario.
Thank you.
But I don't believe that you could reintroduce your original notice of motion at this point in time, given all that's gone previously. What we're dealing with at this moment in time is the report that's in front of us. So we have an officer's recommendation, and any councillor around this table can amend that officer's recommendation or move that officer's recommendation as is. It's entirely up to the councillors at this table.
In that case, may I move a motion that the officer's recommendation be noted, but that the town of Bassendean ceases spraying glyphosate on or near children's playgrounds.
So the exact wording of what you want to move, if you could just repeat the exact wording of what you'd like be amended, so I can actually make sure that the minute clerk has got that, so the councillors are clear.
Okay.
Before I move to ask for a seconder. So just if we can have that wording, you can take a minute and sit down if you'd like to compose that for a minute.
Just on that, I think page 73 of the agenda has the Councillor Carter's original motion.
So what I'm getting at is the current officer's recommendation is what we're dealing with. So you'd have to amend the current officer's recommendation.
Oh, I'm just saying where that text can be found. That's all.
Okay.
Now, would it not be open to Councillor Carter to move an alternative motion?
Sorry, I can't.
Would it not be open to Councillor Carter to, rather than amend the officer's recommendation, move an alternative
Yes,
recommendation?
yeah, either amend or an alternative. That's what I meant. You know, it's up to the councillors to make a determination about how. An alternative would be more appropriate, apparently. So.
Thank you very much. Then, with your indulgence, I would move that the town of Bassendean cease spraying glyphosate on or near children's playgrounds. And we've discussed this on numerous occasions, but I would like to make my point clear. This has been going on for about a year, and I think it's time we made a decision.
That's fine. So
Yeah.
just to check, Amy, you've
Amy?
got. I have an alternative recommendation that town of Bassendean cease spraying glyphosate on or near children's playgrounds. Okay. So you're happy with that one? That's your alternative. So councillors, I would ask if there's a seconder for that recommendation, that alternative. So Councillor Carter, that falls. So,
I want to hear what Councillor Carter has to say about it, so I'm happy to second it for the purpose of having that discussion.
okay, so Councillor Carter, you've got a seconder, and that's with Councillor Politica. And I'll ask if there's anyone against. Yes, councillor Wilding, so we will enter into debate. Councillor Carter?
Okay, right. I'll try and keep this as clear as I can. And as I said first, I thank Ms Davey and her team. They've done a terrific job on that report. But there are different priorities at play here. Tonight we have come to an impasse. The officer's recommendation, or the officer's report, recommends that there be no change to current practice, and it brings us back to the beginning, what's to be done. And glyphosate is a toxic agricultural chemical, which is banned in many places around the world and even in some places in Australia. I can give you a list of all the countries if you like. Regular glyphosate, sorry, it's been a long night. Spraying takes place particularly at two major reserves, Mary Crescent and Sandy Beach Nature Playgrounds. Success Hill is another area, as well as the Cadbury Reserve and wood-chipped areas. And they're scheduled to occur at times when usage is low. But glyphosate, as we know, the signs only stay up for about an hour post-completion. The glyphosate, as we know, hangs around, particularly on hard surfaces. And so therefore that time may not be long enough. So what can we do to protect children using playgrounds? At the very least, we could arm residents with appropriate information. And Councillor Polivka at the briefing session in September asked if the signs indicating spraying could stay up longer. Also, that information be made available to parents and carers that the playground has been treated and herbicide residue may be present for some period of time. Such information would give parents and carers the opportunity to consider whether they will bring their children to the playground during this period, and that is probably something to consider as well. And clearly cost is a factor in choosing glyphosate over safer but perhaps more expensive methods. But we already use steam weeding, we already use slashing, we already use several other ways. And Ms Bremer sent us all some information about alternative methods which we could actually look at. So part of that is the stated goal. We have a stated goal already to minimise the use of herbicides where possible. We're not asking for it to be taken out of the whole district. I understand that, just around children's playgrounds. Let's keep it nice and tight. So to finish up, we need to provide parents and carers with appropriate information. We need to really consider, do we need to keep doing this? Because I know, and so many other people know, gardeners, professional gardeners, are aware that eventually there will be a ban on this substance. And those of us who've been through, previous ones like 2,4-D, DDT, asbestos, understand that there is this move and we're in that period now where you're moving through and away from it. And so there is a really very real risk to young developing bodies and brains that carrying on with the use of glyphosate close to playgrounds makes it untenable, certainly. And I thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carter. Councillor Polivka, you seconded?
No, happy to reserve.
Okay. Councillor Wilding, you were against?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. To start off, I very much wish I could support the motion that Councillor Carter is moving at the moment. Across the process and throughout the process, I've been very supportive of seeking as much information from the staff and from the town and from alternative sources as possible to seek alternative options to, as the motion intends, to remove the use of glyphosate in playgrounds. However, in the 6 months and more that we've been considering this item, it has been brought to us many, many times that that is not a practical solution at this point in time. Not that it's not an admirable goal, because it is an admirable goal to reduce the use of glyphosate. And I think, should that be, if the council had provided an option that was not prohibitively expensive, was not prohibitively impractical, I have no doubt that this council would resolve to stop using glyphosate immediately. However, that is not the report that council has for tonight. Council has a report that outlines the implications of such a decision. Councillor Carter mentioned keeping the motion nice and tight. It brings us back to the same problem that we've had with this resolution for the last 6 months, where it has not been nice and tight. In and around children's playgrounds, it still has not been defined and would not be defined in this motion. And the suggestions that Councillor Carter has provided of ways that signage and other ways that we can mitigate the risk are not addressed in the motion that we are currently debating. The motion that we are debating would eliminate the use and does not mention science. In fact, the use of science and other methods would be supported by the current officer's recommendation and not what is being debated at the current point in time. I really wish that we could just snap our fingers and make this work for the town. And I know that the alternative, the officer's recommendation as it was put on the agenda, notes a continuous review to look at new technologies, to look at new approaches, to look at things other councils are doing over time and come back to this issue. And when we are able to make those decisions to go forward and stop the use. But right now, we have an obligation to ratepayers in the town to use their money wisely. And with the mitigations in place that we currently have, we are not freely spraying glyphosate on playgrounds. We have mitigations in place. Those mitigations are detailed very, very thoroughly in this report. To spend the additional money for that extra bit of safety at this current point in time, or theoretical safety even, is not appropriate in my view, and that is why I do not support the motion put forward by Councillor Carter.
Thank you, Councillor Wilding. Councillor Bluthwaite?
Am I able to have a question that's been prompted by something that Councillor Wilding has said? It just relates to the costing and the tightness of the notice of motion.
We are in debate.
Yeah.
I think that I don't think we should be asking questions in debate. I think we should move on with this because, okay, I'll allow it.
Well, the thing is that the officer's report relates to Councillor Carter's proposed notice of motion, which was broader than what she's now put forward, because there was the other places that children congregate and all of that. So what we've got back is that will cost $45,000 to do it in this other way. I'm just wondering if that $45,000 related to all those other areas that Councillor Carter was initially seeking to have it banned in, and if it is a more restrictive, that is just the playgrounds and near the playgrounds, whatever that happens to mean, would that cost still be $45,000 or would it be less? It's just the report doesn't actually mesh with what's now currently before us, so that's the issue I have.
Thanks, Councillor. Through you, Madam Mayor, I think it's important to note that it also states in the report that it would cost $45,000 but also be ineffective in these areas, and that's probably the biggest, for me as the Executive Manager of Infrastructure who has to look after these areas, that's the biggest issue for the town, particularly at Sandy Beach and the new infrastructure.
I suppose the question though was, because initially what Councillor Carter had sought, to which the report relates, is to discontinue the use of glyphosate in or near children's playgrounds, which is the full extent of her current motion. But then her previous motion goes on to say...
But we're not debating her previous motion.
But the report relates to the previous motion, unfortunately. And so it says, and then it goes on to say, and other public places where children congregate, again, that's very broad, such as daycare centres and schools and also near waterways. So I'm just wondering if that much more expansive area, the 45,000 relates to that. Now that Councillor Carter has contracted that to just the playgrounds, is that amount smaller or does it remain the same?
Yeah, through you, Madam Mayor, the amount was focused on the playgrounds.
Okay, so that answers my question.
Right. Thank you. Okay. So we've had debate we've had opening from Councillor Carter, we've had Councillor Bluthwaite waive his seconding, we've had opposition from Councillor Wilding. Do I have any councillors in support? Do I have other councillors who'd like to vote against? For or against? Okay, I'm going to put it to the vote.
I have a right to.
I'm sorry, you have a right. Apologies.
Sorry about that. Yes, we've been told that alternative weed management strategies would be ineffective. I'm not quite sure. And I'm not quite sure how all the other places that don't use glyphosate manage. They all have parks, they all have playgrounds, and they all have places where children congregate. We're obviously we're going to lose this one. It's a pity because I think eventually we're going to have to bite the bullet and work out how we're going to manage certainly these sensitive places without glyphosate. And so if the review, we are going to be reviewing it over a year, what is the mechanism for doing that? And when will councillors know? Will it be a quarterly report? Will it be a yearly report? Is this going to be something that's put in place, or is it just something that they'll look at? So what exactly are we looking at for reviewing over a year?
So, councillors, I'm just going to say here that when I open up the questions, we should be asking questions, and when we're in debate, we should be in debate. So,
True, but that's my debate.
Perhaps in the
You
future,
should think.
we need to tighten that up a little bit. So, councillors, Councillor Carter, you're not asking that question, or it's part of your debate, or
It's a rhetorical question, but it is a real question too. And can I point out that the code does allow questions within the debate period?
I know, but we've been asking questions which are not strictly tied into the motion that is now being debated. So, councillors, it is, I'm going to add, if you don't mind, I will answer that. It is up to, you can always ask me as Mayor to have an item brought to a workshop. So if you want to have that can always happen. It depends on the timelines. Where clearly, if we want to have an annual a workshop on this, that can happen as well. These are all things that can happen for a council, but we have to liaise with our administration to make these things happen, and we have to manage our time. So it's not impossible, it just needs to be discussed.
Thank you, but we were talking about a review of what we are doing, and if that's the way to do it, that's definitely one strategy. But clearly this is a very important matter. I mean, it's something that councils have grappled with, countries have grappled with all over the world, and it's not something, I mean, if glyphosate was that harmless, there wouldn't be this issue, but it's not. And we in Bassendean need to make a decision. So I implore my fellow councillors to think about the long-term issue and think about what message we're sending to parents as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carter. So, councillors, I'm going to put that to the vote. All those in favour? Oh, Councillor.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And very briefly, I'd just like to know what the particular motion is that we're about to vote on. We've gone dancing between a few pieces, so if the minute clerk might be able to just
If you would just
rephrase
read it
what's
out
happening,
again, what's
that'd
being
be greatly
voted on at the
appreciated.
moment.
Thank you.
Councillor Carter.
That council requests the town cease spraying glyphosate on or near children's playgrounds.
Okay. So, councillors, I'm going to put that to the vote. All those in favour of Councillor Carter's alternative? Councillor Carter. All those against? That's Councillor Lifka, Councillor McWilliam, Councillor Ames, Councillor Wilding, and Councillor Hamilton. You've got that? Thank you, ma'am. Okay, councillors. We'll move on to 13.1, which is the notice of motion that I put up for our bulk verge collection service. Oh, sorry, we have to go back to the officer recommendation for 12.11, and the officer's recommendation is that council notes the contents of this report and the town's ongoing commitment to continuously review its approach to weed management to evaluate the latest developments and best practices. So, councillors, Councillor Carter lost the alternative that she put up. We now have an officer's recommendation before us. I'd like to know if we've got a mover from Councillor Clifford.
I'd like to move it just with the amendment that it be sent to a workshop at whatever frequency the CEO had in mind.
You can certainly add or amend.
Yeah, to evaluate latest development, best practices.
So, Councillor, sorry, I think Mr. Gibson would like to.
Through Madam Mayor, I believe the review of the weed management is due for presentation to council in March next year. In terms of the previous discussion about what amounts to the review, I believe there's a streetscape weed management decision earlier this year, which calls for a subsequent report to be presented by March 2023. So council might want to keep that in mind as part of their decision making.
So that's happening regardless, so we can just move it as is. We're happy to move it as is then.
Okay, so councillor Polifka, you're moving the
Yep.
officer's recommendation. Do we have a seconder? Councillor McWilliam? Do we have anyone against? Councillor Carter? I'll declare that carried. So we move to 13.1, and apologies for jumping ahead there, so, which is notice of motion, book to verge collection service. So I'd firstly ask councillors if you have any questions on this item. Councillor Polifka?
Yeah, just following up with a question that was asked by one of the audience this evening of Director of Finance, the insurance. So we are fairly comfortable that the LGS will cover that contingency. So between our insurance and the insurer and the service provider of the skip bins, that there are no gaps.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I don't really know what question I'm answering because it's just too hypothetical. There are a myriad of accidents and incidences that could occur that might be due to different organisations' negligence. It could be no one's fault. It could just be an accident. I just couldn't speculate. We need to consider the case on its merits.
I suppose insurance always being hypothetical, and you don't know what's going to happen. That's the reason you take out the insurance. So we're comfortable that we've covered the field for all things which would be reasonably foreseeable.
The town's public liability coverage with LGIS is comprehensive, and it kicks in if the town is negligent in some way. So, you know, there's an obligation on the town to do everything it can to try and prevent issues as well and injuries. And then if in the unfortunate event that something occurs that the town would otherwise be liable, that's when our coverage with LGIS would
So
kick
it's
in.
comprehensive, so you're not concerned, not really something that warrants further investigation.
No, and I wouldn't have thought it'd be any different to sort of the current service in terms of our current waste selection, which carries risks associated with it as well.
Yes, that and common sense.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'll just ask Mr. Campbell, we had a discussion about this notice of motion. You're generally comfortable with the amended format? Yes?
Yeah, through you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
So, any other questions, councillors? So,
Yep, there's one other.
yes, sir?
So this here, it was contemplated that the skip bins could be brought within the property.
This is for it's for a booked verge collection. So as the old service where people put their stuff on the verge, this is a booked verge collection, but it's limited to who can acquire this service. Now, for instance, if you take the properties down Guildford Road, they've got very almost non-existent verges. So it's anticipated after discussion with Mr. Campbell, it's anticipated that many of those properties down Guildford Road would be able to access a booked verge collection service. The other parameters that we discussed, I'll leave that to Mr. Campbell too.
Yep. Thank you for the question. Through you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, it was considered when we were establishing the service whether or not someone would have sufficient space on their verge for a skip bin. So working with our contractor, we've got a number of alternatives, including placing the bin on private property where a waiver is signed that indemnifies the town and the contractor for any damage to infrastructure on the private property, as well as a booked verge collection service where that is not possible as well. And then finally, if all those previous options are not available, where we could provide additional tip passes.
Councillor Carter.
Could I ask a question that, what about if people don't have the physical strength or ability or even the height to get things over into a skip bin?
That's point one.
Oh.
But allow,
Yeah.
allow councillor, sorry.
But it hasn't been brought up as an issue for...
Yeah, so something we are in discussion with our contractor about, and we're not at a point where we can announce a service, but those discussions are underway.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Wyden.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just touching on the question around insurance again, might be speculative, so please forgive me. For a skip being placed on a verge, it becomes LGIS in the council's insurance. Should a resident sign a waiver and have the skip bin on their property, and someone wander onto the property and then board the skip bin or some hypothetical scenario, what sort of liability would the resident then hold that liability for the skip bin on their property? And is through that process of them signing the waiver, they then inherit an additional level of liability that they don't currently have in the current system?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I probably have to take that one on notice. It's getting quite complicated into legal areas. The town can't you can't waiver away its responsibilities. So if the town couldn't attempt to try and mitigate its level of responsibility or the due diligence or the mitigation approaches or anything like that it would otherwise need to take through a waiver, it would need to continue to do that. So it probably wouldn't make much difference practically to us, but I'd have to take that on notice. And again, it would probably come down to particular facts and circumstances of the case.
So can I follow up with a question? Sorry, councillor. Can I just follow up with a question there? That question related to skips on your private property, but if this notice of motion is passed and it allows the waste officers discretion to offer a booked verge collection or in certain circumstances, it has to be governed by the circumstances that the waste officers will determine. Would that not then make that problem disappear more or less if it's not going onto the private property? I know that you've got the waivers, but if the waste officers have the discretion to offer a booked verge collection in certain circumstances, then it's not actually going on the private property.
Yeah, I'd have to take it on notice, Madam Mayor.
Okay. Councillor McGlue.
Through you, Madam Mayor. In terms of this possibility of people falling into skip bins or climbing in to find the ultimate treasure, someone else's rubbish, but theirs, their treasure, and ending up not being able to get out and hurting themselves in the process. Bunnings rents out skip bins with that closed and have a padlock on them with a little, sort of digital lock thing. And they're absolutely fantastic. I use one myself because I hate it when I get a skip and people fill it up for me. So I'm just wondering whether we could ask whoever is going to ultimately provide this service, whether they wouldn't actually consider using those skip bins.
So
Yeah, through you, Madam Mayor. It was a consideration in early discussions with the contractor Veolia. Their experience with lockable skip bins isn't great, and they didn't recommend their use. These bins, comparatively to the Bunnings bins, are in high use, and they generally take a heavier weight, and the bin can get deformed, and the lid may not close all the way. The locking mechanisms can get stuck closed, and we've got to force them open. There's a number of issues that they didn't recommend having lockable bins.
And we're also going to go on this.
Can I just say, councillors, that the notice of motion before you actually doesn't deal with skip bins. It deals with the potential to offer a booked verge collection for some people in the community who are in certain circumstances. So further questions, councillors? Okay, so I have this notice of motion I'm moving. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Ames, do I have anyone against? I declare that carried. Thank you, councillors. So there are no announcements of notices, other announcements, other notices of motion for the future meeting. No. There's no urgent business, there's no confidential business. So the next briefing session will be on Tuesday the 6th of December, commencing at 6 p.m. And the next ordinary council meeting will be held on Tuesday the 13th of December, commencing at 6 p.m. So I will declare this meeting closed at 8:12 p.m.